I am here with renowned historian Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. to speak about how Black and Jewish Americans have collaborated on advancing social progress and why it is so important that we do so now. Thank you so much for being here with me, Dr. Gates.
My pleasure.
So you have often said that racism and anti-Semitism is a stream that exists underneath the floorboards of Western culture. Can you talk a little bit about why that is and how have Black and Jewish communities come together in the past to fight that?
For years, I taught an introduction to African American studies at Harvard. I would start my lecture course at Harvard with the following line. Under the floorboards of Western culture run two streams. One is anti-Semitism and one is anti-Black racism. And anytime a demagogue needs somebody to hate or needs to create an excuse for economic scarcity, all they have to do is lift up those floorboards. Black people and Jewish people share two things in common. One, a history of being despised, and one, a history of being envied, but for different reasons. Jews are envied for the so-called the stereotype of economic prowess, economic ability.
We run the world.
Black people are envied for being natural athletes or masculinity or certain other stereotypes. There always will be an economic crisis in every society. And there will always be a need of some leader to blame a group of people or a large factor for that economic scarcity.
So how do the two communities, or how have our two communities in the past built solidarity when there are a lot of interests trying to drive us apart?
People forget that Africans in the United States reinvented themselves primarily through the Hebrew Bible in English, the Old Testament. So much of Black culture is based on the Bible, starting with the biblical story, of course, of Exodus. And many of the most beautiful spirituals, like Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air, I could go on, believe me, have to do with African American enslaved people who listened to the King James Version of the Hebrew Bible, taking those stories and creating music out of them, creating myths out of them. Jonah and the whale, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know, all these songs I used to hear when I was a kid. And it took me a long time to realize that these were Old Testament stories. So we have been spiritually connected long before it was even articulated, long before Jews understood it, and probably long before enslaved people had even met an actual Jewish person. But there was a horrible riot in Springfield, Illinois in 1908. Lynching became epidemic with the collapse of Reconstruction. So Black men had been given the right to vote, the genie was out of the bottle, and racists wanted to put the genie back in. So they resorted to terrorism. And one form of terrorism was to lynch Black men ostensibly for rape, but it didn't have anything generally to do with that. Often it had to do with the economic success of a Black businessman or someone who was demanded the right to vote, et cetera, et cetera. So starting in 1890, the Black vote was suppressed. This was accompanied by a wave of terrorism, manifesting itself in lynching. Well, by 1908, a horrible riot occurred in the North. And a group of people, white people, said, this is horrible. We have to do something to help Black people. And they called an organizational meeting, and that gave birth to the NAACP. And many of the people who were there at that meeting happened to be Jewish. Many of the schools that were built in the South were funded by one man named Julius Rosenwald in collaboration with Booker T. Washington. And they're called the Rosenwald Schools. And it was just through the generosity of this man. Now, the community, he put up most of the money, but the Black community had to put up part of the money or some effort. But he was so concerned about the absence of public funding for schooling for black people that he decided that the most important contribution he could make to race relations ultimately would be the building of these schools. And the most famous partnership, of course, historians nickname the Grand Alliance, which is the civil rights movement. And the civil rights movement was an example of black and Jewish liberals working together for a common goal. The black tradition and the Jewish tradition at their best, symbolized by Martin Luther King and Abraham Joshua Heschel, arm in arm, fighting for voting rights. I made this series about the history of blacks and Jews because we face a common enemy. We saw it in Mother Emanuel AME Church. We saw it in the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, and we saw it in Charlottesville. I was watching the Charlottesville thing with my wife. I couldn't understand what these guys were saying. You know, and I turned to her and said, who will not replace whom? And she said, they're saying Jews will not replace. I go, what planet are these people on? We are seeing more and more eruptions of white nationalism, and who do they hate in common? Jews and blacks. Fanon, the psychiatrist from Martinique, famously wrote in 1952, the anti-Semite inevitably is a Negrophobe. And Al Sharpton actually says that in our documentary, that most people who hate Jews hate black people too. So that we need to figure out a way to put aside our differences, agree to disagree, just like a marriage. You know, sometimes we sound like couple therapists, say, hey, you two, you got to work together. You're not going to agree on everything, right? But you have more in common than not. And you have to put aside your differences and forge the alliance because the hatred is coming. The hatred is here. And you need each other to fight it. How do you bring these two groups together? I mean, essentially, in any political coalition, you have to agree to disagree. So we can't have a litmus test for membership. I cannot say to a Jewish person, unless you agree on these 5 things, you can't be in my coalition. And if you're Jewish, you can't say to a black person, unless you agree to these 5 things, you can't be in our coalition. We have to figure out who our common enemy is. And our common enemy is hate.
Yeah.
Our common enemy is hatred. And when people start looking for who to hate, who to lynch, who to burn, who to scapegoat, more often than not, they find 2 groups of people, Jews and black people. That's been true historically, and that is true today.
Are there any examples that you can think of where Jewish leaders or black leaders have kind of have brought their communities together through something unexpected, like either an event or some sort of shared interest?
I think the most dramatic example for me, I was a teenager, was Freedom Summer in 1964, when black and white college kids descended on the South in order to fight for voting rights. And it led to the death of 3 people who happened to be black and happened to be Jewish, who were murdered just because they were standing up for the rights of black people to register to vote. That's our finest moment. That's when you're doing something not for a reward, but because it's for the greater good. And it exemplifies a principle. The principle of the right to be a full member of a democratic society. And you decide to do it, not because someone is paying you to do it, not because you get a direct result, but because it is the right thing to do. That is the best of the Black-Jewish alliance. And that is what I want to see rekindled today. Because I don't want there to be a Springfield riot in order for the coalition to happen. We need to be prepared because it's going to manifest itself again. It's manifesting itself already. And it's going to get worse because economic scarcity is going to get worse. And again, in times of economic scarcity, Jews are scapegoated and black people are scapegoated.
Yeah, I think you are. I think you really hit it on the head. And I think that you're really touching on something that is socially a social norm that is really harmful, especially to people who are from, minority communities. And this idea that, I can do something that, Julius Rosenwald wanted to start this school because he could and because it was a good thing. I think now people really take this other sort of attitude where I can do something bad because I can, or I can screw someone over because I can. But I think we really need more of the sort of sentiment, this giving, collaborative sentiment.
We're not talking about forming a political party. We're talking about needing allies. Needing allies when you need allies most. And for us, it's the rollback of affirmative action. When I went to Yale in 1969, I was one of 96 black kids to hit Yale's campus in either the freshman class or transfers. The class of 66 had 6 black guys to graduate. And 3 years later, 96 kids hit the campus. Why? Because of affirmative action. What was affirmative action? Affirmative action dismantled a racist quota on the number of black guys, because Yale was total male until 1969, the number of black men who could matriculate. So affirmative action got rid of a racist quota. Jews understand racist quotas because there were quotas on Jews. So it's the history of affirmative action is deeply misunderstood. It ended a quota and allowed us to compete. Who was there when I got there? Sheila Jackson Lee, Linda Darling, the great educator at Stanford, Kurt Schmoke, the first black mayor of Baltimore, Ben Carson, Dr. Ben Carson, Candy Carson, his wife, who was in the class behind me. Anthony Davis got a Pulitzer Prize in 2020 for music. I mean, these are some kick-ass people, and they deserve to be there, but we never would have gotten in without affirmative action. So when we see affirmative action under attack, we need white allies. Maybe maybe we need white allies the most when we're not around, when white people are with each other, and people say horrible things about black people. That's when we need, say, our Jewish friends to say, no, you can't, you misunderstand what affirmative action was. It dismantled quotas just like they had quotas for us. We need to stand up and protect each other and defend each other when we're not even around. And maybe that's the most important. When we're, the most important way that we could fight to protect each other, to dismantle stereotypes about each other that are being espoused or voiced when we're not even in the room.
Behind each other's backs.
Behind each other's back.
I think that is a great place to end. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gates. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.